The atmospheric processor hummed its dying song across the Martian plateau, a mechanical death rattle that Kevin had heard 3 times before on 3 different worlds. He crouched beside the massive cylindrical structure, his gloved fingers dancing across the diagnostic panel while red dust devils swirled in the thin atmosphere around him. The readout was unambiguous: catastrophic failure in 72 hours. After that, the terraforming station and everyone in it would suffocate. "Kevin, we've got movement in Sector 7. Elsa's voice crackled through his helmet comm. "Biosignature doesn't match any catalog species." He frowned, pulling up the shared feed on his heads-up display. The thermal imaging showed a small heat signature huddled against the leeward side of a rock formation, approximately 800 meters from his position. On Mars, where Earth had seeded only carefully controlled bacterial colonies and engineered lichen, any unknown biosignature was cause for immediate investigation. "I'm closer to your position than base," Kevin said, already calculating the oxygen expenditure. "Uploading my processor diagnostics to command. I'll check it out." "Negative," Elsa replied. "I'm already en route. You finish with that atmospheric unit. We need breathable air more than we need mystery creatures." Kevin smiled despite the situation. Elsa had been the chief xenobiologist at Schiaparelli Station for 16 months, and in that time, she'd never once let protocol override her scientific curiosity. He could picture her now, bounding across the russet landscape in the loping gait that Mars's .38 gravity demanded, her collection kit already in hand. 20 minutes passed. Kevin managed to bypass 2 of the processor's failing circuits, buying them perhaps another day. Not enough, but every hour counted when you were filing emergency evacuation requests across 40 million kilometers of space. "Kevin," Elsa's voice had changed. The curiosity was gone, replaced by something he'd never heard from her before: uncertainty. "You need to see this." He found her in a shallow cave, barely more than an overhang carved by wind that had blown before Earth had mammals. Elsa knelt on the rust-colored regolith, her helmet lamp illuminating a creature that should not exist. It was roughly the size of a large dog, covered in translucent fur that seemed to shift between white and pale blue depending on the angle of the light. 4 legs, a barrel chest, a blunt snout. But its eyes, those were what stopped Kevin's breath. They were dark and intelligent, with a depth that spoke of consciousness, of awareness, of something more than animal. The creature was shaking. "Genetic scan?" Kevin asked, kneeling beside Elsa. "That's the problem." She pulled up the data on her tablet, her gloved hand trembling slightly. "It's showing markers from at least a dozen Earth species. Canine, feline, ursine, but also others. Cephalopod neural complexity, avian hollow bone structure, and genetic sequences I can't identify at all. This isn't natural evolution, Kevin. This is engineered." The creature made a sound, a high-pitched keening that resonated through the thin atmosphere. Kevin activated his suit's audio processors, running the vocalization through linguistic analysis algorithms. The readout made his skin prickle. "That's not random noise," he said quietly. "That's structured communication." Elsa was already ahead of him, her own algorithms running parallel searches through xenolinguistic databases. "The pattern repeats every 7.3 seconds. It's... God, Kevin, I think it's asking for help." They worked quickly, establishing a basic translation matrix using the creature's vocalizations and corresponding biochemical stress markers. The suit sensors could detect cortisol analogs, neurotransmitter patterns, even the minute electrical impulses that raced across its semi-transparent fur. After an hour, they had a vocabulary of perhaps 20 concepts. That was when the creature looked directly at Elsa and made a sound their computers translated as family, gone, none. Elsa's hand went to her helmet, an unconscious gesture, as if she wanted to touch the creature but couldn't through the layers of technology that kept her alive. "Where did you come from?" she asked. knowing the translation software would convert her words into frequency patterns the creature might understand. The response came slowly, painfully. The algorithm stitched together fragments: made, purpose, serve, family, gone, alone. Kevin felt ice in his stomach. Elsa, run a carbon dating analysis on those genetic modifications. She did. The results appeared on both their displays simultaneously. 200 years, Elsa whispered. These modifications are 200 years old. Before the Schiaparelli station, before any human settlement on Mars, before the terraforming project had even begun, when Mars was still studied only by robots and distant telescopes. Someone was here, Kevin said, and they created this. Over the next 6 hours, as the station's atmospheric processor continued its countdown to failure, they pieced together a story written in genetic code and half-understood vocalizations. The creature, they began calling it Cub, for lack of a better term, had been created by researchers who'd established an illegal black site laboratory in the Martian caves. Corporate, probably, trying to develop genetic modifications away from Earth's regulatory oversight. The cub had been designed as a companion species, engineered for intelligence and adaptability, meant to serve as both work partner and emotional support for isolated researchers in extreme environments. But something had gone wrong. The facility had failed, accident or sabotage. They couldn't determine. Everyone had died or evacuated. Everyone except the cub, who had somehow survived in the caves alone for 2 centuries. The hibernation structures in its cells, Elsa explained, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. They're far beyond anything we've developed. It can slow its metabolism to almost nothing, wait out decades in suspended animation. But it still needs to wake periodically, still needs to hope someone will come. The cub was still shaking. Kevin watched Elsa watching the creature, and understood something he hadn't fully grasped before. She'd been the only xenobiologist on Mars for 16 months. No other humans shared her specialization, her passion. She'd been professionally alone in a way that mirrored the cub's physical isolation. "We need to get back," he said gently. "The processor." "Can wait another hour," Elsa interrupted. "This creature has waited 200 years." She spent that hour not collecting samples or running experiments, but simply sitting with the cub, letting her suit's external speakers play soft sounds, human music, whale song, recordings of Earth forests. The cub slowly, incrementally, stopped shaking. When they finally had to leave, the cub stood and followed. It understood somehow that this might be its only chance. Back at Schiaparelli Station, chaos reigned. The evacuation ship from Earth wouldn't arrive for 11 days. The atmospheric processor had hours, maybe. The station commander was already calling for the crew to suit up, to retreat to the emergency shelters, and survive on bottled oxygen until rescue arrived. But Elsa wasn't in the command center. She was in her lab, working with a ferocity Kevin had never seen. "What are you doing?" he asked. "The cub's genetic structure," she said, her eyes bloodshot from staring at screens. "The hibernation sequences aren't just cellular. They're molecular-level atmospheric adaptation. Kevin, this creature can extract oxygen from carbon dioxide with 97% efficiency." He understood immediately. The processor uses bacterial colonies that we modified from Earth species, but the cub's genetics were designed here, for Mars, 2 centuries ahead of our technology. She pulled up cascading data streams. "If I can isolate the gene sequences, culture them, introduce them to the processor's bacterial matrix. That's a month of work in a lab. We have hours." "Then help me." They worked through the night, Martian night, which meant nothing in the sealed station except that the sun no longer filtered through the dome. Elsa coaxed genetic material from the cub, who seemed to understand and allowed the sampling without resistance. Kevin rerouted power from non-essential systems, giving Elsa's culturing equipment every erg of energy available. The cub lay in the corner of the lab, no longer shaking, watching them work. At hour 68 of the processor's 72-hour countdown, Elsa had a solution. Literally, a bacterial suspension that contained the cub's oxygen conversion genetics modified to integrate with their existing atmospheric systems. Kevin carried it across the Martian surface in a cryo-container, racing against time and depleting oxygen. He injected it into the processor's main culture tanks and held his breath, the one thing he couldn't afford to do for much longer. The first signs appeared after 20 minutes, oxygen levels rising, not dramatically but steadily. The bacterial colonies were adapting, spreading, converting carbon dioxide into breathable air with an efficiency that exceeded even the original design specifications. By hour 71, the processor was stable. By hour 72, it was exceeding baseline performance. That night in the station's common area, Elsa sat with the cub. Most of the crew gave them both a wide berth. The creature was still unnerving, still not quite natural in the way it moved or watched. But Kevin sat down beside them. "Command wants to send it to Earth," Elsa said quietly. "For study. They're calling it the most significant xenobiological discovery in human history." "It's not xenobiological," Kevin pointed out. "It's terrestrial genetics just assembled differently." They don't care about the technicality. They want answers. They want to understand who created it, why, what other technology might be hidden in those caves. She stroked the cub's translucent fur, and it leaned into her touch. They want to take it away from the only home it's ever known. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up his tablet and began writing a report. "What are you doing?" Elsa asked. "Documenting that the cub's atmospheric conversion genetics are location-specific, that removing it from Mars would damage its cellular structure, make it impossible to study effectively, that the only viable research protocol is long-term observation in its native environment." He looked up at her. "By, say, a dedicated xenobiologist with experience in genetic modification and extreme environment adaptation." Elsa's eyes widened. "You're lying." "I'm speculating. There's a difference," he smiled. "Besides, we'll need someone to help culture those bacteria as we expand the terraforming operation, someone who understands the cub's genetics intimately." The cub made a sound, and their translation software, improved now with 60 hours of additional data, offered, "Stay here, family." Elsa's hand trembled as she touched the creature's head. 2 centuries of isolation, ended not by rescue but by chance. By a dying atmospheric processor and a xenobiologist too curious to follow orders and an engineer willing to bend the truth. "Yes," she whispered, "family." The cub finally, completely, stopped shaking. 3 months later, when the investigation team arrived from Earth to study the ancient laboratory, they found Elsa's research station established at the cave mouth. Inside, the cub rested in chambers that mimicked its centuries-long hibernation, but now it woke to companions, to purpose, to the knowledge that it was no longer alone. Kevin visited when he could, bringing reports of atmospheric expansion, of new settlements spreading across Mars's rust-colored surface. The cub's genetics had accelerated terraforming by a decade, maybe more. In a strange way, it had saved them all by allowing them to save it. On his last visit before transferring to Elysium Station, Kevin found Elsa and the cub outside, watching dust devils dance across the plateau. The creature had grown, its form more substantial, as if being less alone had allowed it to become more real. "You know," Elsa said, "in all those centuries I think it never gave up hope. It kept waiting, kept surviving, kept believing someone would come." "Faith," Kevin said, "in a creature designed in a laboratory." Maybe faith was part of the design too, something you'd need if you were meant to help humans survive in impossible places. The cub turned its dark, intelligent eyes toward the distant sun, and made a sound their computers no longer needed to translate. It meant home. It meant family. It meant the end of shaking, and the beginning of something neither human nor creature, but something in between, something that could only exist on Mars, in the red dust and thin air, where lonely things found each other and decided to survive together.